The setup, November 30th, 2060. Ava, an AI echo of famed Cascadian folklorist Ava Waters, entered the room before her hologram did. With the warm voice of a grandmother at holiday time, she greeted her human collaborator. "Welcome back to the studio, Aurora. I hope the immersive ethnography conference went well. Would you like to know who has stopped by the center in your absence?" Rory liked working with Ava. She was a comfort that filled the space of being far from home on the shores of Lake La Marge up north. It was ladies like her and her mom telling stories at the bar after the cannery shift was over that led her to become an ethnographer. Where other people heard just another fishtail, she knew there was always something true there. Thanks, Ava. The conference was great. This year's focus was Artists and Ancestors, the voices of our past, present, and future. Rory ran her finger across the plaque on her office door. Dr. Aurora Bennett, Ph.D., Immersive Ethnography Department. Really? I wish the people who ran these conferences took a second to not sound like a generative science bot. Oh well, happy to be home. What's on the menu? Maybe this will cheer you up. Ava pulled up a range of spatial scans and photos from what looked like a vast Neolithic artwork across the holographic projectors and displays that filled the studio space. It's from a Dr. Kaya Lumen, Ph.D. Cyber Archaeology from the University of California. Do you want to hear his message? Maybe after I get my coffee. The ethnographer dropped into a deep gaming chair and admired her mad scientist lair. She reached for a bright red cup labeled Fungi Joe, with the name Rory in big black inky block letters written across it, and took a deep, satisfying sip. Part 1, Field Work. Thanks for coming out, Rory. Kaya jumped out of his Zypher and started unpacking a set of wetsuits and aqualungs. You said you were a medium? He said, looking at the bright orange wetsuit. Yes, medium. Aurora Bennett was horrified at the rental orange dive suit. Most of her work involved working in virtual space in very dry and very clean conditions. It was a rare day she would put on a damp piece of rental clothing that looked like it had seen a fair number of bodies before hers. Rory shook herself out of the initial shock and earthy bluntness of the cyber archaeologist. And hello, I don't think we've properly met outside of cyberspace. She extended a hand and smiled. I'm still down for old traditions. It comes with the territory. Good to finally meet you in person, Dr. Lumen. I'm surprised to see you here. The train to San Diego is quite packed these days. Yes, hello. He turned around, not noticing the request for a handshake, and held out the blaze orange wetsuit in a way that seemed to highlight its worn edges and dirty corners. You said you dive? Rory replied with a sigh. Yes. I grew up in fishing communities. Chores was helping my uncles fix boats. Oh, good. He dropped the wetsuit, distractedly assuming she'd already taken it, and began assembling her respirator. I'm sorry for the condition of all this. I've been living on our expedition airship for over a year now. I wish the university would spring for a train ticket or a hotel, but they invested in low-carbon operations back in the 30s, and so a shoddy 7-foot bunk is what it is. He grunted as he pulled the air tanks off the old air transport. These things are about 70 years old, but they're as good now as they were then. Fun. Rory was unamused, unimpressed, uninspired, and it was starting to rain. This was not her ideal start to a December day, but she tried to muster the will to keep her cool with the odd cyber archaeologist. "So this is a fairly unusual request, Kaya. I'm assuming you called me because I dive wrecks and led dive tours through the flooded city. But this is different, beast. Cave diving isn't my thing." She looked at the thick XR dive helmets and imagined herself looking through it to the dark water. "I do fish stories." Kaya Lumen dropped everything he was doing and turned to Aurora. "Precisely. Dr. Bennett, and I don't do living cultures, and I don't like live dives." He waved his hands erratically over the equipment. "Diving is usually up to the drones to do. We send swarms of them in to map and search for evidence of pre-Holocene humans. I mean, I dive, but it's more to recover equipment than any old-fashioned Indiana Jones stuff. Half of this stuff I do from the ship." He calmed himself and took a step closer, refocusing on Rory's eyes. "I've spent my life finding the flooded cities of the past so we can understand our future. But this we had to verify with human eyes. We've known for decades now that animal culture has material remains and, artifacts in the prehistoric record. And just like the Neanderthal, there was a time where at least 9 types of hominids existed at the same time on the planet." Rory's face fell flat. "Oh my God. Did you just bring me on a Sasquatch hunt?" "I mean, I was very hesitant to call them that." Dr. Lumen replied sheepishly. Without breaking, Rory took out her phone. "I'm excited you found some cave paintings or whatever. There is no way I'm not going to risk my life in a winter cave dive in the woods for a Bigfoot story. This is not the way I'd like to die. Good luck, have fun. Excited for the holoportation documentary, but I've got some work to do at my very comfortable studio downtown." Rory pulled the phone to her face, and her hot breath filled the air with puffs of vapor. "Call for a ride home, please," a highly digitized voice responded. "Searching for available services." That's what I thought too, right? I mean, something swims past a camera, it's one thing. But we thought giant squids were just shadows on the sensors until we saw them up close. I'm not saying I saw one, but these paintings down there, it's like they're made from the mycelium and the story they tell. Kaya put his hand out. "Look, don't go. I showed you the scans and some of the pictures, and after all, you did come out here today. Really, just see for yourself." The patter of rain against the pine needles and winter undergrowth filled the silence and seemed to saturate the air. "Origami Air Co-Zephyr service available in 3 minutes, shall I confirm?" The crackly computer voice shattered the peaceful moment. Rory stood in the woods. What if this guy really did find some lost civilization down there? One of her first memories at the tribal center was talking to an AI reconstruction of Naya, the 13,000-year-old girl they found at the bottom of Hoyo Negro at the turn of the century. Back then, Naya told her no one knew she existed until the 2000s, and knowing then that a little girl like herself was here, on the Turtle Island, at the beginning of time, made so many of her family's fish tales that much more real. It made her own story that much more important. What if she could do that with whatever or whoever they find down there? What if she could bring the next Naya to life in Cascadia's Hoyo Negro? Aurora Bennett straightened her back against the wet cold of her poncho and reached out her hand. "All right, Dr. Lumen," she smiled. "If we're going to do this, we better get going." She confirmed to her device, "Clyde, cancel my ride." Then, amazing. Okay. Kaya trailed off mumbling while he triple-checked the equipment, and Rory grabbed the damp old orange wetsuit and searched the trees for a branch of modesty. After the difficult portions of putting on a wet article of clothing was done, Kaya crashed through the branches looking deeply at his augmented display. "I think it's all here. The main cave is just down the hill from Inspiration Point." He tapped the air and Rory's phone blinked. She glanced down to see the map and trail markers appear on her screen. "I've got the heavy stuff waiting at the dive site." Just as the rain set in, they arrived at the stunning cave entrance. An ancient root system of redwood cedars entwined with the Douglas firs that covered Cascadia and opened here to a vast earthen cathedral. Rays of sunlight broke through the dirt from gaps in tree roots nearly 100 feet above their heads and could be seen deep in the distance as they stood in the grand earthen archway. Rory's let out a soft but audible "Whoa." Kaya abruptly interrupted. Amazing, right? All that stuff on the side, it's actually fungal, mycelial-like species. There aren't many specimens this large outside of the area. People usually think they're looking at a geological phenomenon, but nope. His headlamp shined in her face. Mushrooms. Kaya tilted his head in a sideways nod and snickered. Not that way, though. Down that dark tunnel over there. This way. He lead on into the increasingly slippery dark tunnel with a cheer. It didn't take long, and the darkness went from pitch to a soft moonlight glow. Part 2, The Descent. The thick orange wetsuit may have been clammy and uncomfortable, but Dr. Aurora Bent imagined it was better than the icy cold of the underground river she found herself in this December morning. At least the water was crystal clear. She could make out the ends of the reach of her headlamp several meters, and Dr. Lumen was clearly aglow in front of her. You really can't see it well with our lamps on? Dr. Kaya Lumen, the expedition's primary investigator, floated calmly in the wide-open chasm the duo had dropped into. That fungal anomaly in the cave entrance extends all around us here. It's woven into the dirt, roots, and rock. But here, down this way, even through their insulated wetsuits, they could feel the cold rush of current forced from a channel beside them mix with the relatively warm surface water. Okay, brace yourself. Kaya turned to start to swim into the channel and turned on his aqua jets, which powered him effortlessly down the flooded hole. As he led on, Rory heard the sound of his light humming over the intercom and was comforted. At least some old sailor traditions were the same no matter where you went. Right behind you. Rory glanced at the augmented display, selected a path, and pressed go. She could feel the heavy bulk of her tanks kick into some sort of gear and glide her into the current, as if she was as elegant as a fish. Despite the easy entry, her heart skipped a beat as the glow from the work lights and dive site faded into blackness as they descended deep into the underground network. As Kaya hummed round after round of an old sea chanty, they dove down, down, down against the current. The tune repeated them into a calm trance as their hands ran against the branching roots and clean basalt tunnels as the caverns grew tighter and tighter. Soon, they found the earth closed in around them. Rory's throat began to unconsciously tighten. So, Kaya, we're pretty far away from the dive site, right? I kinda lost track of time. She giggled nervously as her heart raced. Breathe in and breathe out. She thought to herself and tried not to think of exactly how much dirt and darkness there was between here and the fresh air of the forest. She could feel the cold darkness sink into her wetsuit and infect her skin. It's like we're floating in the veins of the forest down here, right? Kaya slowed down, and Rory's unit automatically paired into a formation. Their XR scanners lit up the 3D environment in their displays in shimmering polygons, outlining critical formations and detailing the flow and temperature of the water. Now, was it the left or the right? Kaya shined his lights into Rory's mask and, her display and all its comforting information blinked out of existence in an instant. Just kidding, look up. His light flashed and flipped in an upward motion, then held steady on a glowing fissure that appeared to open to an air pocket just meters above them. Kaya held his headlamp steady on the immersive ethnographer, putting her in a literal spotlight as she slowly ascended to the dark and mysterious cavern surface. As Aurora turned her gaze up, the shine from Kaya's lamps faded away to her peripheral vision. Looking up instead reminded her of looking down and all the holoportation she'd done to deep-sea locations as an undergrad. Orient maybe? Space? The mycelium here wasn't just on the walls and branches, but floated in the water. The faint blue glows of bioluminescence created an illusion of starlight. The rift in the dimensions between water and air, stone and fungus, was only perceptible as a milky way of floating life before them. And then she ascended. When they broke through the water into the air pocket, the world became hyper-real. Kaya swam to a corner of what appeared to be a basalt shelf in a cavern about 5 meters high. In the soft light of the glowing fungus, they could make out the whole space, even without the help of their augmented gear. I'm thinking, wow, I think it's even lost a centimeter since last week, Kaya said to himself sadly while looking at a place where the mycelium on the cavern walls was drifting off and clouding the water. There was about a half a meter more of this in this room when I contacted you the first time. Kaya turned of his lanterns. You too. He waved at Rory as they bobbed in the small, ever so subtly glowing gap. Then it occurred to her this was not a place built for light. She fumbled with the controls until she at last just blurted out, "Clyde, lights." Right away, her personal AI responded, and the lights on her suit went out all at once, in an instant. Without warning or a moment to transition, the mycelium on the wall lit more brilliantly than any XR display or projector array either of them had ever encountered. For meters around them in swirling and painted forms, the story of a prehistoric people played out. Driven underground by the floods and changes of a climate, this people found refuge in the forest and in the rivers under the trees. The roots and mushrooms communicated with them, kept their history, taught their children. And it was all here, painted on the walls in living moonlight, a dozen meters below the earth for who knows how long. What? I asked, this place? Rory couldn't help herself. Kaya slipped the mask from off his face to take a breath of cavern air. It's like, I told you. Don't even. Aurora hoisted herself onto the basalt ledge, which was surprisingly clean and, shaped. She ran her hand on what her mind told her was a very large bench. She whispered, "What the hell?" Kaya tapped his wrist. "Set unit for stasis, turn on all scan." As he belly flopped onto the shelf and rolled onto his back, he let out a sigh. "I hope you don't mind being recorded." The longer they waited, the more intense the glow seemed to fill the room. Soon their eyes had adjusted, so each of them could make out even the fine lines in each other's faces. "Have you dated it?" Rory started to examine the cave art. Its main figures weren't human per se, but definitely hominid. Are these guys here supposed to be giant sloths or something? No and no. I don't think so. Those guys with the tails, the big ones, I think they're more. He stopped and waited, not for effect, but out of nervousness. Human? So your big feet have tails? Rory chuckled. Cool story, but... As she stared up at the cave art story, Rory was interrupted by a choking in her nose and throat. Her head snapped down. What they? Dr. Lumen's face was near hers, and he could feel his hot breath on her cheeks and neck. His hands were open in front of his face, covered in the moonlight glow of the mycelium from the wall that now filled the air, and her lungs.